Hello, Rowan here. We Damage We is the channel. It's Sunday, and you know what that means. It means that Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff has released another alphabet tag. We are up to G. Let's do it. First up, G is for the Great American Novel. What do you consider the Great American Novel? And Jim makes sure to remind everyone, we did do this with the A tag. He very graciously gave me a name drop. I think I was the first person who he mentioned their pick, because I said Great Gatsby. But he talked about how Steve Donahue suggested breaking it down into centuries, and I like that. So I'm going to give a 19th, 20th, and 21st century pick, and I'm going to exclude the Great Gatsby because I said that already. For 19th century, I am not known for my love of the 19th century in literature. The only thing I can think of that's American from the 19th century that I like is Poe, which isn't a novel. He didn't write a novel. But you know what? I'm just going to say Poe. The Collected Stories of Poe. For 20th century, if I'm not going to pick The Great Gatsby, I'm going to go with, like, The Great Gatsby is, like, the critical pick, right? Like, that's the... Like, how, like, The Godfather is the greatest movie ever made, or Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made, but, like, it's not my favorite movie. But, like, so, like, my personal pick for Great American Novel of the 20th century is going to be Infinite Jest. I think that it really has a lot to say about, like, modern culture. And even though it, not quite, but basically preceded the internet existing, I think it still has a lot to say about entertainment and addiction, especially in the age of something like TikTok, that is, like, so entertaining and addictive and compulsive. It's an extremely American novel. And it's also about, like, imperialism and how, like, America and America's ideals sort of infects the world, and the chaos that we cause to the people around us, the world that surrounds us. Great book. I mean, at this point, like, either you've read Infinite Jest, or you're probably never going to read Infinite Jest because you're sick of everybody talking about it, and the people who love it are so fucking insufferable. And I don't blame you. I was lucky enough to have read it in the mid-2000s when Wallace was still alive, and it didn't have the reputation that it now has. It's gotten to the point where I don't really talk about it being, like, amongst my favorite books anymore because it has this association with, like, pretentious white guy douchebags. But it is a really, really good book. Seriously. I can't recommend it enough. If you're willing to put in the time. It's you know, it's a notorious book. People call it hard. It is hard, but it's more an endurance than, like, anything else. It's just so long. It just takes a long time to read it. I remember, I think earlier this year, or maybe late last year, Chris Villa at Leaf by Leaf reread it, and he reads, you know, fairly fast, and it took him, like, 35 days or something to get through it, and that was having read it before as a reread. So it takes time. It takes serious time to get through that book. So if you can, do yourself a favor and do it. And then for the 21st century, this is a bit harder. I've got a couple kind of tossing around in my brain. The one that jumped to the front of my mind immediately was, for some reason, Bubblegum by Adam Levin. Now, I am known for talking a lot on this channel, I think, at this point, because I do it all the time, about Adam Levin's first book, The Instructions, which I have right here next to my desk. It's a very thick, big, chunky boy. Over 1,000 pages. It took him 10 years to write a follow-up, and the follow-up is about 800 pages, so not quite as long, but also a big, thick, chunky boy. And Bubblegum is a world where we have sort of diverted in the 80s from the timeline of our world, and there's like a sort of big to-do on the jacket copy about how it's a world that does not have the internet, and a lot of people were kind of like upset and disappointed by how that played out, because like I think they didn't think about the fact that like since the internet doesn't exist in the world of the book, there's just no mention of the internet. There are no smartphones or anything, but there's no like purpose or like spectacle about it. It's just not there. What there are instead are little, about yay big, robot creatures that are called curios, or cures for short, and they are like little pets that people buy, and you can train them and you can teach them how to do tricks. You can give them little potions that make them do different things, and they're so cute that people compulsively murder them, which is called overloading. And people do it for hobby. They will raise the pets. The older the cures get, the cuter they become. The more you can train them, the better they get at doing tricks, the more cute they become. And so the story of Bubblegum concerns a man in his 30s named Belt Magnet, who was among the first people in the world to ever get a cure when they were given to a test group of mentally disturbed children in a study to see the effects of pet interaction with kids with mental illness, because Belt can talk to inanimate objects when he touches them. Not all the time, but some of the time. He can open his gate, as he describes it, and then have conversations with inans, or inanimate objects. He calls them inans. And Belt is a novelist. He has written and published one novel that was sort of a cult success, and then hasn't been able in the 10 years since to put together something that he's proud enough of to publish. But now he's writing a memoir that primarily is about a few days in his life, but also flashes back to his childhood, where he gets the cure for the first time and has experiences talking to inanimate objects, and his childhood friendship with a man named John Boat, who is basically Elon Musk. He's an astronaut billionaire who is the most famous person in the entire world, and he's married to a intersex woman named Fonda Jane Henry, and she is the most famous artist in the world. So it really is clearly Elon Musk inspired. It's a book about, Infinite Jest, American culture, our obsession with cuteness, and our obsession with violence, and how we have these sort of horrific violent tendencies that live under the surface of everyone. And it's very, it says a lot of subtextually about things like gun culture and mass shootings in America, and why that is such a uniquely American thing, because places for instance, our fine neighbors to the north, Canada, have more guns per capita than America does, yet nowhere near the amount of gun violence. So, what is it about America that makes this so? Is it our American violence that is, hiding under the surface of all of us? Yeah, this was my favorite book of 2020, Bubblegum. It came out in paperback a couple months ago, so you should be able to find it at most major retailers at this point. Yeah, it's big, but it's worth it. It's very funny, very weird, wonderful, just wonderful. Love Adam Levin so much, and I know a number of people have read the instructions. That was published by McSweeney's, which that's a whole thing in and of itself. And I've seen a couple people on BookTube talk about the instructions, or either owning it or having read it. Guilty Feet, I know, has read it because he commented something on one of my videos saying, hey, shout out for a fellow Adam Levin instructions lover. And I know Rick McDonnell has talked about the instructions and owns it, but I don't think has read it yet. But they're both amazing. I like the instructions more, but Bubblegum is like 250 pages shorter. So those are my 3 picks for a great American novel. Wow, this is already so long-winded. Next prompt. G is for many countries like Guatemala, Guyana, Grenada, Greece, Greenland, Germany, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, and Georgia, of course. Jim is but Jim lives in Georgia. What is the last book you read by an author from a country that begins with the letter G? That is a great question. Let me find out. That's what I thought. Okay, so earlier this year, I read the book You Should Have Left by Daniel Kehlmann, who is German. This book was fucking bad. This is the only thing I've read this year that I gave less than 3 stars. On Goodreads I gave it 2, but that's like a gracious 1.5 out of 5. It is about a family of 3, man, his wife, and his 4-year-old daughter, who rent a cabin in the remote mountains of Germany. And then tell me if this sounds familiar, but the house defies the physical possibilities of space and begins to expand and contract from inside. And things move and shift around the inside of the house. Does this sound familiar to you at all? I saw this show up on Goodreads in like the Readers Also Enjoyed category for the things that I liked, and it was very short. So I checked it out at the library, and I did read the whole thing in about an hour and a half maybe. And it's just bad. It is obviously derivative of House of Leaves in its sort of main hook, but it's not particularly scary, and it's not particularly well written, and it's not particularly interesting, and none of the characters are interesting, and nothing interesting happens in it, and it's just bad. Don't read it. But that was the last thing from a country that starts with G that I read, because it is from Germany. G is for Georgia. Have you read any books by Georgian authors or books about Georgia? I have not. Jim did give a couple of recommendations of books that in the last couple years have been longlisted for the Booker International Prize that are from Georgian authors. The Eighth Life. I'm not even going to attempt to say these Georgian last names because I will just absolutely butcher them. But it was The Eighth Life and The Pear Field. Both Georgian novels that have been nominated, longlisted for the Booker International in recent years. So those are good places to start. I might have to add those to my TBR. Because I know, like, literally everything I know about the country of Georgia used to be part of the Soviet Union. It's where Stalin is from, and Jim lives there. And that's it. Like, I am about as sheltered American as you can be on this subject, so I could do with some education. Next, G is for Gone with the Wind, which of course starts with G and is also set in the state of Georgia, which also starts with a G. Have you read Gone with the Wind, and if so, what did you think of it? I have not read Gone with the Wind, but I have seen the film Gone with the Wind. It was my grandmother's favorite film. I've seen it 2 or 3 times. Most recently, probably, it was a while ago. I was in high school, so probably about 14 years ago or so, give or take. And I fucking hate Gone with the Wind. It is a story about the kinds of people that I have the least sympathy for, and so much of the, like, I know that the book isn't necessarily, or the movie either, meant to be apologists for the Confederacy. That's not, like, the point of the book. But it does want you to feel sympathy for this exquisitely rich, these exquisitely rich white people that live off of the backs of slaves, enslaved humans. And when they don't, they have to go through hardship, oh boo fucking who. I could not care less about Scarlet and Rhett and their problems, and oh, they're starving, and oh, it's so hard, and oh, the fires burned all their shit down. I don't care. I do not care. I hate them, and I want them to starve to death, because they fucking suck. Fuck them. Fuck Gone with the Wind. Got me worked up, Jim. G is for genre. Is there a book genre you avoid? I have not made this a secret. I've talked about it in videos before, but I am not a great fan of fantasy, epic fantasy. My father is, to put it lightly, a very big fan of Tolkien. My childhood bedroom in my parents' house is now the Tolkien library that houses his Tolkien collection. Hundreds of books, rare books. He has a dust jacketless British first edition hardcover of Fellowship of the Ring. That's like the keystone of his collection. He's got replica swords from the movies hanging on the wall. He's got like a screen accurate Glamdring and Sting and video games and all the movies and every format they've ever been released in, and fucking empty cans of Pringles that were movie tie-ins from when the movies came out. Like, it is a serious collection. And there was a time when I was a child, before the movies came out, that I grew up with The Hobbit, and then when I was a little bit older, Lord of the Rings. And then when the movies came out, I loved them dearly. My family and I would go, we went at midnight to see them all. My dad joined a local Tolkien fan community, and we would go to parties. They would do a birthday party for Bilbo every year in September. I think the 22nd, is that his birthday? Can't remember off the top of my head, but I might be right. It was sort of like my dad had, going back to the 70s, I think, been a huge Tolkien fan, but the movies like kicked it into overdrive, and it became like kind of the only thing that he really wanted to ever talk about or care about, or it was a lot. It got to be a lot. And so by the time I was, 18 or so, it had been 7 years since Fellowship came out, and the, I would say, oppressive amount of Tolkien that was in my life had really soured me. I've never been able to really go back and enjoy it. I just had too much. I saw the movies so many times. I don't probably ever need to see them again. And I did see the first Hobbit movie, and I was like, this was pretty bad. And then everybody was like, wow, well, the sequels are even worse, so I didn't bother. I didn't see the second or the third Hobbit movies. All of this is a very long way. I don't think I've ever gotten this in depth about it before, but it is a very long way to say that this killed fantasy for me, basically. Because epic fantasy, I really feel like it is rare that it gets out from the Tolkien shadow. So much debt is owed to Tolkien. Because of Tolkien, everybody wants to make it a series. Everybody wants to make their books fucking 1,000 pages long. Robert Jordan is, of course, like the ultimate example of this. He wrote 14, well, kind of. He did die. But Wheel of Time is 14 books, and the shortest one is like 750 pages long. It's a lot. I would go so far as to say that is probably not necessary. Like, there are books about like the decline and fall of the Roman Empire catalogs like the entire history of a civilization. And it's long, it's multiple volumes, but it's shorter than the fucking Wheel of Time. So when I read fantasy, it feels bad to me, usually. And I struggle with... I've talked before more in depth about this. There are more critical, analytical reasons why I struggle with fantasy. I find that people put too much emphasis on world building and creating systems of magic and creatures and politics and histories and all of these things that are really cool, but that's not like a story. That's not telling a story. And people, I think, a lot of the times struggle to tell compelling stories and have good, compelling characters. And I have given things chances. I read the first 4 Song of Ice and Fire books. The 4th one was so bad that I never could get myself to start the 5th one. And then after 5 years, the show ended, and I was like, well, I don't really feel like I need to read any more of them. For as much you can say positively about Martin being, creating good characters, he really fucked up pretty bad with A Feast for Crows. Like, holy smokes, is that book fucking bad and boring and stupid and inexcusable. And then we had to wait 7 years for the next one, and now it's been 10 years and we still haven't gotten the 6th one? People tell me the 5th one is much better than the 4th one, but I don't care. And I tried to read Mistborn. Couldn't get into it. Then I tried to read Paths of Radiance, the Stormlight Archive, also by Brandon Sanderson. I got like 200, 300 pages into it, and I burned out. I just couldn't do it. It's just not for me. I just feel like there's on so many levels, I just don't vibe with epic fantasy. And then, of course, the actual prompt that got me on this Steve Donahue-like tirade was, is there a genre that you avoid? And historically, romance as well. But I did, if you follow my channel, I did just read a Chuck Tingle book. And Chuck Tingle is a sort of niche LGBTQ plus erotica writer who writes sort of, I would say, humorous queer erotica about weird stuff. The one that I read is a Harry Potter parody called Trans Wizard Harriet Porber and the Bad Boy Parasaurolophus, which is about a trans woman magician who falls in love with a trans man dinosaur. This book did not do much to dissuade me from my bias against romance. The things that I liked about it were that it eschewed so many of the tropes of romance fiction that I fucking hate, that are like idealizing abusive, or at worst abusive, or at least like dysfunctional relationships. The quality of writing, while not great, was higher than I would expect from the genre. And it had a lot of interesting creativity and world building that was really fun and funny and exciting. So those are things that are like generally absent from romance, I find. I do think that there's a lot of entertainment to be had in the world of romance, particularly Harlequin romance. They're sort of like the book equivalent of like Lifetime movies or like Hallmark Channel movies, where like they're all the same, but they're kind of like hilarious because they're like so cookie cutter. But yeah, I don't really read romance. Not that I don't read things that have romance in them, but like stuff that's going to get put in the romance section at a bookstore. Not for me. Generally, I don't really read mysteries either. Again, I have, but most of the stuff that's mystery that I read, I don't like. I read Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, and I was like, this is okay. So I read Gone Girl, and that was fucking bad. When I was a kid, like when I was a little kid, like 10, I loved Tom Clancy. I thought he was fucking awesome. Rainbow Six and Patriot Games were amongst my favorite books when I was 10. Because they're books about badass elite special ops dudes murdering people. And like that's awesome when you're 10 years old. I got older and I learned about American geopolitics and the ways that the American government and government operatives interfere in world politics through things like Rainbow Six. And suddenly Tom Clancy was a lot less appealing. I will say that he's got a knack for plots that are fun and exciting. I always wished that they had like really done Jack Ryan as it's done in the books, like all the way through, because they've done some of them, but like it didn't really pop off until, was it Executive Order where he becomes the president? I can't remember if that's Executive Order or not, but the one where the guy is the Japanese businessman orchestrates the terrorist attack and they fly the plane into the White House and kill fucking everybody, and then Jack Ryan becomes the president, and it's just like, what? That shit rules and works as a movie. The Tom Clancy books in movie form aren't bad. Patriot Games is a pretty good movie. I rewatched it like a year ago and it holds up. But yeah, that's what I think of when I think of mystery. And James Patterson, obviously, which is like, if you've ever worked in a bookstore, you know how fucking buck wild James Patterson is. And there are people who will read all of them. They came into the bookstore regularly. And they're bad. They're bad books. They're really not good. When I was a child, I read a couple of the Alex Cross books, which are his sort of main series, the ones that he actually writes himself. But there's a lot of James Patterson in every genre, including romance and child YA, fantasy, many mystery series. And they suck. And they sell so many copies. And that's just kind of how I feel about mystery books. Is like, they suck, and they sell so many copies. Obviously, there are glaring exceptions to this rule. You know, Raymond Chandler. And other people? I don't know. I don't have anything against, like, pulp noir stuff. But it's not, like, great literature. It's fun, but Sherlock Holmes. I thought of another good one. I talked about that for so long. This video is so long. I thought this was going to be a 15-minute video. And we are past the 30-minute mark. What the fuck is going on? G is for Goodreads. If you use Goodreads, what are your statistics like? Books read, books you want to read, average rating, book reviews written. I have 429 ratings. I will say that I have gone through a lot of really long periods of not reading very much in my adult life. I read a ton when I was a kid. And a lot of the stuff when I read was not when I was a kid, I haven't rated on Goodreads because it's shit like Animorphs and Goosebumps and things like that. I've talked about this before, but in 2020, I read 3 books. It was not a great year for reading. 2021 has been like probably the most productive reading year of my adult life. And I had sort of been having a really productive time reading, and then found BookTube and started watching BookTube, which fueled my passion to read. And then I started doing BookTube and making videos, which made it even more, to the point where, like, at this point in my life, books are kind of like the main artistic format that I have going on in my life. Like, I haven't really been watching movies or playing video games or listening to music nearly as much as I, normally do, because I'm reading instead. But despite that, I've only got 429 ratings, which is not a ton. 4.02 average, because it's high, but I like to think that it indicates that I'm good at picking things to read that I'm going to like. Not to say that there is no value in reading things that are bad. I think that there is a lot of value in reading things that are bad. For instance, David Foster Wallace, to bring him back up, taught a fiction workshop. There's a syllabus that made its way online from a fiction workshop that he taught when he was teaching in Illinois, where he had his fiction students read popular fiction books that are not good. Stuff like Thomas Harris, I remember, was on there. And he had them read all these bad books so that they could see what didn't work and then apply that to their fiction, which is a good subversive way to learn. Usually we read things that are great and then try to emulate them. But I think there's just as much value in reading things that are bad and then trying to learn from someone else's mistakes. Some people, saw this as pretentious, particularly when it's coming from Wallace, who's already seen as pretentious for having written the most pretentious book ever written. But for me personally, I just find that I would rather not read bad books if I can. I do get things out of them, I do learn from them, but I don't think I learn nearly as much as I do from reading things that are good. And it makes me sad and upset, and I don't have fun. And that's no good. You want to have fun. And I'm not like Steve Donahue, where I'm reading everything because I'm a critic and I need to have the scope so that I can, know what's good and what's bad and see where things lie in relation to one another. I have no obligation to anybody. I just get to read whatever I want. Because, I guess I'm a critic because I'm on BookTube and talking about and reviewing books, but, I'm not indebted to any sort of institution. Or viewership, for that matter. I just read what I want, and if I like it, I talk about it. Man, I'm really talkative today. Why am I talking so fucking much? You don't want to watch this whole video. This video's too fucking long. Oh my god. Oh yeah, what were the other things I was going to say? To read. When I started watching BookTube, circa, let's say, March, so 3 months ago, my to read was under 300 books. As you can see, it is now almost 650. Watching BookTube has not been good for my TBR. There are so many books I want to read, and I have come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to read all of them. I'm never going to read all of them. I try to prioritize acquiring the ones that I want to read more immediately so that I don't wind up having books that I hold on to for forever and never reading, which is a terrible habit of mine. I probably owned, let's say 7 years ago, I owned 3 times as many books as I currently own, maybe more. And then I moved across country and got rid of everything that basically, if I had read it and it wasn't like so good that I knew that at some point in my life I was going to read it again, gone. And if I hadn't read it, but I didn't think I was going to read it within the next 2 years, gone. So I had like every book by Philip Roth, and I got rid of like all of them because I just was like, I'm not going to read these anytime soon. I kept like the 5 that I was like, well, maybe I'll read those sooner rather than later. The TBR is a wild beast. It's a wild stallion. I don't have that many shelves on my Goodreads either. I started ones over here, owned and unread, and didn't finish. And those are not comprehensive lists at all. But I started making them and then gave up. The only one that I really like tend to is favorites, which is stuff that's like true 5-star reads, things that I think of as like all-timers in my personal canon, and there are currently 30 books on that list. So that's pretty cool. Those are my Goodreads stats. Those are all the prompts, but Jim suggests that you can make your own prompts. And then he lists a bunch of things that start with G. So instead of taking the time to be thoughtful and make up my own prompts, particularly when I've already talked so fucking much, let's just go through these things really quickly, and I'll just try and speak briefly on them. First, girl detectives. My favorite girl detective book is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. It's a book that I brought up in some video talking about how I see it on like a ton of different booktubers' bookshelves, but nobody ever actually talks about it. And then Juan from Plagued by Visions, he just put out his 5th installment in his Most Disturbing Books of All Time series. Highly recommend that for you if you've never checked out that video or his videos in general. He is pretty much the GOAT on BookTube, in my opinion. He's got great taste. We have very similar taste. So if you like my channel, you probably came here from his channel anyways when we collabed. But if you haven't watched his channel, watch his channel. But he was like, oh man, Rowan called me out because I mentioned that he had Night Film. And so he talked about it briefly and has said that he wants to talk about it more. I want to talk about it more too, but like him, he talked about, and I will talk about as well, that I haven't read it in a long time, so my memory of it is pretty fuzzy. But that's a great book. Female detective book. God. I have a very impersonal relationship with God. I was not raised religious and don't have any real religious beliefs and don't really care about God at all. Sorry. Gardening. Fucking hate that. It's hot and sweaty and when I was married, my wife got into gardening and I would help because I, didn't want to be a shithead and just sit inside all day. But yeah, like going out and renting a tiller and tilling dirt when it's like 95 degrees outside, not great. Didn't love it. Guns. I have a complicated relationship with guns. I, maybe 2 years ago or so, fired a gun for the first time in my life. My good friend Tim collects guns, but I just sort of had a thought where I was like, just to be on the safe side, I should learn how to shoot a gun, just because. You never know when that could come in handy. So I did. He took me to the gun range, and we fired guns. I shot a .22 caliber rifle, which is a low power projectile, and then a 9mm pistol. And that was pretty wild. Definitely saw the appeal. Definitely understood why people love shooting guns. It is wildly expensive, so I will never do that. And I don't think I will probably ever be at a place mentally where I would be comfortable owning a gun. I just, I know in my heart of hearts that is a bad idea for my longevity. But my book that I wrote, which I have been thinking about what to do with, and when looking around and thinking maybe I should find some indie publisher or something who wants to put it out. We'll see. If you are watching this and you're curious about my book, I'll send it to you and you can read it if you want. But anyways, there's a gun that is sort of at the center of that book, and there is a scene in the book where the narrator goes and learns how to shoot a gun, which was modeled off of my experience going out with Tim and learning how to shoot. So, generally speaking, I don't like guns. I live in America, and America and guns is a pretty wild topic. I am lucky to live in a city that has not seen a major gun tragedy in my lifetime. There is certainly gun violence. Locally here in Minneapolis, there have been 3 children under the age of 10 that have been shot, 2 killed in Minneapolis in the last month, which has been a very hot button issue. People are talking about the rise of violence in Minneapolis. But living in fear of the gun is a very real thing in America, because people go to Walmart and they die every day. And I just have to try to not think about it, because there's nothing I can do. So yeah, that's my thoughts on guns. Next is green. Green is... I have 2 favorite colors. One of them is green. The other one is purple. Green, great. Love green. Next, Graham Greene. Never read Graham Greene. Never really appealed to me. Never seemed like the kind of thing that I really needed to get on top of. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Just not my sort of niche world of literature. Garbage. Shirley Manson, sure. Garbage was an okay band, right? And guides. I'm gonna take that to mean travel guides. I did, when I went on my honeymoon, I bought the Lonely Planet guide for Hong Kong and Kowloon, and I did make great use of it. We found our hostel in it that we stayed in, which was great, and it recommended a lot of fun places for us to go, good restaurants. But I will say that I found just as much, if not more, just by Googling, I'm a record collector. I don't know how, I don't think I've talked about that much, but I'm a pretty, I have a lot of records. I have around 1,000 records, vinyl records. Been collecting for about 20 years. So just Googling Hong Kong record store, that got me some sweet spots. There's a record store in Kowloon called Kubrick. That was pretty cool. It wasn't a great record store. It was all new, and you know, prices comparable to what new vinyl is like in America. So it didn't really incentivize me to buy anything. But it was cool to come in and, like, they're playing Benji by Sun Kill Moon on the stereo when I came in, and I was like, oh. This was before everyone knew that Mark Kozlik was a rapist. Yeah, that was a bummer when that happened, wasn't it? So let's end on that note. How long is the raw footage of this video? 53 minutes! Are you still here? Are you watching? I'm unhinged today. I don't know what the fuck my problem is. Right before I did this, I just got home from 7 hours of board gaming. So it's not like I'm starved for talking. I've been hanging out with people all day. I don't know. Jim, you got me riled up with your G tag. G unit. I'm going to end, actually, talking briefly about one of the great bad games of all time. I don't know how much crossover there is on my channel with people who play video games, but if you still have access to an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3, and you have never played 50 Cent Blood on the Sand, you're missing out. Big time. That game is great. It is a Gears of War clone starring 50 Cent and the members of G Unit, and it is about 50 Cent plays a concert in the Middle East for some sort of chic oil baron type who cannot pay him cash, so he pays him with a skull encrusted with diamonds, which is promptly stolen by terrorists. So, 50 Cent and Lloyd Banks and the other members of G Unit go out on a bloody conquest to kill all the terrorists and give me back my skull!
How can I help you, my friend?
Saeed, come on. That bitch has got my skull.
And they yell, you know, funny, weird, awkward lines all the time at terrorists as you mow them down. And it's like, it's not a great game, but it's good enough that it's like playable. It's very playable. And it has split screen co-op. Forgotten classic. 50 Cent Blood in the Sand. And you know it starts with G. G Unit. Okay, I think that's enough. If you watched all of this, you're a saint. Have a good night. Love you.